Alright guys, so we got a fairly requested video for you tonight. We've had a lot of viewers request that we do a video on my welding table. I had a customer in the shop a couple weeks ago, and they saw the table and really liked it, so they decided they wanted me to build one for them. So that's what we're going to do tonight. It is a 48 inch by 144 inch, so it's a 4 foot by 12 foot welding table, 1 inch plate. His is going to have 8 inch by 8 inch square tube legs. So that's what we got going tonight. First things first though, you can see the shop is in utter peril. I need to clean some of this stuff up so that I can get to where I can lay the plate flat on this table to be able to build it upside down, because that's how I build them. This is not a video on how everyone should build a welding table. This is a video on how I build a welding table. This is how I was taught how to build them. I really like this design. It's a good size. So I'll go ahead and get all this crap cleaned up, get everything moved around so that I can get that plate in here. Once I get to that point where I can actually start doing some work, we'll come back to you. Alright guys, so we got the shop all cleaned up. We've put everything away so that we can get this 4x12 piece of plate on here. So we got the plate sitting here, but we've already ran into our first curveball, and this is just typically how it goes. So let me show you what we got. So here's our piece of plate, but I didn't realize this until now. Problem we have, so I'm not sure what the crap they did here, but now I get to fix it. And then if you come down here, they had a little faux pas here, and I don't feel comfortable giving that to a customer, so now I get to fix these two pieces. And I know a lot of you are thinking, well, I'd take it back. Well, I would take it back, but that would be 3 trips in there for this one piece of plate. When I got there, they informed me they had sold me a piece of plate that they didn't have. I'm tired of dealing with them. I'm probably going to find a new steel supplier, but I've got the piece of plate here. I'm just going to deal with it. So to be able to get this into the shape that I feel comfortable giving it to a customer, we're going to have to fix these edges. So I'm going to start with this end piece, and I was going to use track torch, but that track torch was given to me and it's got old rotten hoses, and I don't have a track for it, so I'd have to build a track for it, and I don't really want to take the time to do that. So plus I don't have any tips that are the right size for 1 inch plate, so I've decided I'm going to use the plasma. I'm going to cut it by hand, which will be obviously better than this, but I'm going to take my guide here and I'll set my guide on here. I'll just drag the plasma down this guide and get it as straight as possible. And I'm not going to take a whole bunch of material off. I want to take as little as possible, but I've got to get rid of this, whatever you call this. I'm not very happy about it. We'll go ahead and get the plasma set up. We'll get a cutting tip on it. We're going to crank it up to 85 amps since this is 1 inch plate. We'll just go slow and we'll go ahead and drag cut it. So here we go. Alright, so we got our cut guide all set up here. So I'm just going to go slow and drag this across here. I'm going to run a little bit of a test right here on the corner just to see how it goes. But we'll give this a try. Okay, I'd say that's a heck of a lot better than the edge they gave me. So we'll go ahead and run this, cut the whole thing. Just gonna go slow, don't want to go too fast. Want to try to keep my speed consistent so it all looks the same. So here we go. You can see it looks a heck of a lot better than it did. So I feel pretty good about that. It looks good. It's not, doesn't have a big gouge in it like it did before. So now I got to hit this long side. There's a section here. So this section right here, until it gets to here, is good. So I think what I'm going to try to do is, and this is actually a little bit wider than 4 feet. So I'm just going to try to tie in with their little screw up right here. And that should, yeah, that'll get us just about perfect. So I've got to push the plate to this side of the table, and then we'll cut this section. We're not taking a lot off. It's just like on this side, it's going to be like 1/8 of an inch. I just want it consistent. I want it to look consistent. I'm not sure what they had going on there, but we'll get it fixed. All right, guys, give you a look here at what this edge looks like now that we're to the point where we should have been right off the bat. Edge looks good. Okay, so now that we're to that point, truth be told, you should never have to do that unless you got a terrible steel supplier, which obviously I need to find a new one. When you get it from them, these edges should be dang near perfect. You shouldn't have to go through this. So now we're to the point where normally we would be starting out. So now we're to the point where we're going to start laying out where our legs are going to go. Now, height is your preference, whatever you want. My welding table is 39 inches high. I've worked on one that was 38 inches high. I'm a little bit taller. I'm 6 foot, so I like a table that's about 39 inches tall. I feel like that's about perfect working height. Plus, you don't want it too high if you're gonna put a vise on it, because then you're gonna have to be working way up high. The customer requested that this one was 41 inches high. He's a tall guy, but he doesn't want to bend over, and he just said he wants it 41, so 41 it is. Bridger's over cutting the legs. He's cutting our 8-inch by 8-inch by 1/4 inch wall, square tube. That's gonna be what we're gonna build the legs out of. So while he's cutting that, I'm gonna start laying out where the legs are gonna go. He also bought a fireball tool vise that's gonna mount to this. So we need to make sure that we lay the legs out to where that's not gonna interfere with where his vise is gonna mount. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a look at those texts, make sure I get the measurements all right. I'm gonna start laying this out. So when I get it all laid out, I'll come back to you guys and show you what we got. All right, guys, so we got our marks here. So I'm 8 inches from the outside towards the middle on either side. This is 8 inches. And then this way, I actually went 14. Now my table is actually 12 off the end, but my vise isn't near as big as the fireball tool vise. So for me, I didn't need 14 inches, but his base is a lot bigger, and it would probably fit on 12 inches, but it would be a little tight. So I pushed it back 14 inches, and we're gonna go with that. Building a welding table isn't like a cookie recipe. You can modify it however you want. Do what works for you. If you guys decide that you want the legs a little wider, push them out towards the outside a little more. If you decide that you want 12 or 10 inches off the end and you don't need to put a vise on it, then do it. If you want 38-inch height on your tabletop height, do that. But this is just a baseline. This is just to show you how I build my table. There's some structure that we'll get into in just a minute, and I'll show you how I tie everything together. And that's not even necessary, but that's just the way I like to do it. So I'm gonna get the 4 legs up here now. I'm gonna set them in place. I'm gonna start leveling them up, squaring them up, and tacking them. Once I get those tacked into place, Then I'm going to start pulling my measurements for the structure that ties the legs together. You can see I've got that structure that holds the legs together. That kind of ties everything in, makes it nice and solid. So we'll go ahead and get the legs tacked up and then we'll move on to the next thing. All right guys, so we've made a quick modification. I set the leg up here, and with as wide as these legs are, I measured the distance between the two legs and it was only 16 inches. I don't really like that. I want a wider, stable base. And so where these are 8 inches wide, that still gives him plenty of clamping room underneath the table. And so I actually pushed it out another 2 inches. So it's 6 inches off the outside edge to the face of the leg. We're still 14 inches off the end. I just changed it from 8 to 6. That way, that'll give us 20 inches between the two. We're gonna go with that. So I've got the welder set up. We're gonna go ahead and start squaring these, tacking them up. If you guys watch the channel a lot, you know I prefer to use dual shield when I'm welding anything heavy iron. Any sort of structural steel, I prefer either dual shield or stick. I feel like it's better for a lot of reasons. It burns through mill scale like it's not even there. And you get really good penetration. It burns really hot. Same with stick. So I would say if you're gonna build a table of this size that's this heavy, you're probably better off welding it with stick or dual shield. So we're running 045 wire, and we're just gonna go around, work our way around the table, start tacking these legs up, getting them square. I love it when I leave it on cut and blind myself. Love it. Sometimes with stuff like this, if I need to go just a little bit, I'll break off a piece of wire and I'll use it as a shim. Money. You can also use a wedge. This is a B&B pipe tools wedge. It's got different steps on it for different measurements. So just any kind of wedge that's got a really thin point on it will help you get this. Money. All right guys, so we got our legs all tacked up here. Next order of business is going to be to cut our smaller tube that ties the legs together. I'm going to start with the piece that goes in the middle from leg to leg, and those are going to be 20 inches. So I'll cut a couple of those real quick. Once I get those tacked up, I'll pull a measurement from that smaller piece of tube to this smaller piece of tube. That will give me my length on what that needs to be. So we'll go over to the saw real quick and we'll cut a couple of these pieces of tube. So I got my piece here that doesn't fit. Well, that's interesting. So I'm using some 2x3 tube here. You can use whatever you want. This is just what I decided to use. So we'll go ahead and get the other one tacked up, pull our measurement. When we get ready to tack this one up, we'll come back to you. All right, guys. We got our fireball square up here. and we got our tube cut. So sometimes being a one-man operation, you gotta get creative. So that's what we're gonna do. So we're just gonna take this, maybe. Sometimes I'll clamp a piece of plate underneath. The fireball is going to be just fine, as long as it doesn't fall. Ooh, length on that's perfect. Sorry guys, camera battery died again. This cold weather, it wreaks havoc on the camera batteries. They don't last near as long. I got this piece tacked up. What I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by the camera battery dying. When I'm fitting up something like this, I'll go through, pull my measurements, lay everything out, tack it up, square it up, check my measurements. And then once I get everything fit up, I'll make sure I got tacks across the whole thing. And then the very last thing you do is weld it up. That way, as long as things are tacked up, it'll kind of hold everything where it needs to be, and it's not going to twist and warp near as bad as if you didn't. So that's how I like to fit things up anyway. Okay, got tacks on everything now. So I do have 2 more things to do. So the only other things I got left to do, I'm going to cut 2 pieces of angle. So the angle, I run from leg to leg on this side and that side. So the reason I put those pieces of angle in there are to keep the table from getting a belly in it. It's just a little bit of added security to try to keep the table as flat as possible. So every little bit helps. I would either use angle or channel on the bottom there. If you're going to build a table this long, it's always a good idea to have something there to try to keep it flat. So I'll go over, I'll get my angle cut, and then I'll come back and we'll fit those up. Once it's fit up, we're ready to weld everything out. So I'll go ahead and grab those and we'll come back to you once we're ready to fit those. So we got our angle cut. So this is how I like to do this. I like to put the outside edge of my angle flush with the outside edge of the tube, and then I lay it so that it's leg down, and then I'll go ahead and weld this solid here on both ends, and then I'll actually stitch weld this to the table. Nothing crazy, just like a 2 on, I don't know, 2 on 16 probably. When I say 2 on 16, that's 2 inches of weld on 16 centers. That's what that means. You can see how this will strengthen the table to keep it from warping or bending or sagging. Now that those are in place, we'll go ahead and get these tacked up. I'll start laying out my stitch pattern, and then we'll start welding this whole thing out. And when I get to the point where I'm ready to show you guys what it looks like welded out, I'll come back to you. So part of the reason I'm only going like 2 on 16, that's not a lot of weld, but we don't want a lot of weld. All it is a table. So we just want minimal weld on the bottom so that it can hold, so that it will hold everything in place. If we put too much heat into it, it's going to warp. So you want to be careful of that. Got our stitch pattern laid out. You can tell how flat this piece of plate is by looking at this angle. There is not hardly any gap across this whole thing. This plate's flat enough, I can just push down and I can feel that it's flat. So I'm just gonna push down on this and tack it and get tacks on all of my stitch patterns. That's gonna hold everything where it needs to be. The other pointer I would give to you guys, if you're looking to build yourself a welding table like this, when you call to order your plate, tell them you're using it for a welding table and you want as flat of a piece as possible. And they're usually pretty good about working with you and finding you a piece that's nice and flat, doesn't have any dings in it or anything like that. So just another pointer. Now that this is all tacked up, I'm going to go over to the other side. I'll get the other piece of angle tacked up exactly the same way, and then we'll start welding. So once I do that, we'll come back and we'll start welding it out. All right, guys, we got this all laid out and tacked up. So I'm going to go ahead and start welding this out. The other thing I wanted to mention was when you weld something like this out, it's good to bounce around too. So weld a stitch over here, bounce around, go over here, weld one over here, maybe work on the cross member for a minute. It's not as big a deal to get heat in this stuff up high, because that doesn't really matter. We're worried about the tabletop. So we want to bounce around when we're welding on this tabletop. Don't want to put too much heat into it. All right, I just wanted to mention that. So let's go ahead and weld this out. All right, guys, next order of business here. We got the table cleared off. We got all the welds done that we can in this position. So the next order of business is we're going to flip it over. And I've got 3 welds on this end and 3 welds on this end I've got to make. So my plan for that is I'm going to go ahead and lift this with the plate clamp here just far enough that I can get the forks underneath it. And then I'll take it outside, set it down, and gently roll it over. And then bring it back in here upright. I'll set it right here on the floor. And then I'll make the last welds, clean it up, and it should be done. So once we get the table rolled over and in position, we'll see if we can't knock out these last welds on the table. All right, guys, so now that we got our table flipped over, I'm just going to drag the welder over here, make those last few welds. We're going to clean up the top. Once we get it all cleaned up, I'm sure they probably don't want Freedom Fab on the top of their table, so I'll buff that off. Clean the top surface up, go around the edges one more time, make sure there's no sharp edges, clean those up, and then we'll come back to you and give you one last look at the table when it's done. All right, guys, we got our table done. We'll walk through real quick, just give you a look at what the finished product looks like. So I took and buffed off the top and wiped it down with brake cleaner. You see the legs are all tied in. Everything turned out good, I think. Pretty happy with that. You see the reinforcement we've got. And one of the things that I'm most impressed about is how flat this piece of plate is. I don't know if you can see it, it's hard with the camera. But this piece of plate is way flatter than mine. Mine actually has a little bit of dip in it right here. Little teeny bit in the middle, but not much. Pretty happy. All right, so all that's left to do now is we're gonna load it up on the trailer and get it to the customer. So 99% of people aren't going to need a table this big, so you could downsize it. Maybe you don't want 1-inch plate. Maybe you're good with 1/2-inch plate or even 3/8 plate. And maybe the size is better, 4x8. But this design, you can take this design and shrink it, or you could even make it bigger. And this is going to be a table that's going to last multiple lifetimes. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys learned something. Thanks for watching as always. See you on the next one. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're going to show you what's going on, guys. Welcome back to the channel. All right, guys, welcome back. Tonight we've got a welding table build. This is one that I've had a lot of viewers. We'll go ahead and get the plasma all set up. If I pushed them 8 inches off the outside edge, that only put 16 inches between the middle of the two legs. Goodness, speaking in parts. So once I got these legs up here, and that's just to, so the reason I put those pieces of angle there is to keep the table from getting a belly in it. Goodness, I can't freaking talk. The reason I put it's just a little bit added, it's just a little bit of added security to try to keep it from getting a belly. Goodness. So we'll go ahead and get this table rolled over, and then once we get it to where we can weld on it, we'll see if we can't knock out the final welds on this. So we'll go ahead. So we're going to go ahead and roll this table over. Once we get it in position, we'll make the final welds on it, and then, yep.